it's our draft day coverage. A special edition.
Wow.
Not only do we have Sam Amick brought to you by Jiffy Lube of The Athletic, we have Backyard Sam, I think for the first time ever. What's going on, Sam?
Renovations or what?
Good morning, gentlemen. Yeah, you get off the NBA playoff road, and your lovely wife and sons have got new outdoor furniture for you on the side of the house, and you decide, you know what, we're gonna mix it up a little bit. So yeah, here we are.
Okay, I'm just gonna say the worry that anyone who's ever listened to these interviews might have. I can see your very nice picket fence in the background. My worry is people are going to be able to hear you doing this. Are we going to see like Home Improvement style? Is drunk neighbor John going to be jumping over your fence saying hello?
That would come from the left.
Okay.
We do have a padlock on the gate. So, I mean, he could make some noise, but I don't know if he's agile enough to get over the fence.
Oh, wow.
Oh, questioning is
weight mark. Okay,
wow.
Let's get right to it as we get Sam in trouble with his neighbors. Sam, you dropped a very nice nugget-filled article, not on the Nuggets, but on the Sacramento Kings with what's going on. Always love it when you check in. Some of the stuff we had heard, a lot of the stuff we had not heard. What was your big takeaway, whether it's the Sabonis, the Russell Westbrook talk? There's a lot in there. Jonathan Kuminga, why don't we start there? Jonathan Kuminga, they may not get him. You mentioned that, but they are now officially in the mix for Jonathan Kuminga, as we understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This was one of those where I just thought, there's been a lot of different nuggets or tidbits out there about them, and I thought I'd try to put together what I'd heard. Like you said, some of it was addressing what was already out there. On the Kaminga front, it was more like, do I think Kaminga's coming to the Kings? No. Miami seems really interested. Brooklyn is the only team with cap room. We'll see what happens. And there is a chance that because of how complicated it is that it might extend into the season. It could take a while. But the point is that, like, the idea that Scott Perry is really trying to turn over a whole bunch of rocks right now, and that, that's a young, dynamic player that he, to some degree, seems to have envisioned as a possible good fit for this group is informative. Similarly trying to get into some of the other players that they were attached to that they, didn't have interest in, that show you where their heads are at. Like Drew Holiday is a wonderful player, but his timeline is not, especially for that price tag, is not something that interested the Kings enough to get that deal done. I think that only would have happened if he came with draft capital, which was not going to happen. So, interesting so far without any major roster changes to see, how much the Kings are kicking tires on things.
And a couple of the guys you mentioned, and the organization, Sam, has been very public about the need and desire for a point guard. And you mentioned Schroeder, you mentioned Tyus Jones, you mentioned Westbrook. Kind of when we look at those three, and if there's others, feel free to share. But what do you think the likelihood and kind of the strengths, weaknesses of kind of looking at those kind of guys for the Kings?
It does feel like the Schroeder stuff is pretty real. It's first of all, he's able to talk with his current team already, so he's discussing things with Detroit, and we'll see if Trajan Langdon and that group finds a way to hold on to him. He was a really nice veteran piece for that young Pistons team that made noise last year. So that's business, order of business number one. From there, it's just a matter of, what would that price point look like, and does he want to be in Sacramento? So I think he's real. The Tyus Jones thing, he's just such an interesting point guard because, we all know that he had this incredible historic run of assist to turnover ratio, league-wide leader for, I think, 5 straight years, but not necessarily as dynamic as some of the other names, but a very good player. And then Russ, that one is that's the one. He has a little history with Scott Perry, if I have the timeline right, because Scott was with Sam Presti in Seattle, and I'm forgetting exactly when Scott parted ways with that organization, but Obviously, Russ and Kevin were the early days once they went to OKC. So, that would be I mean, he's still playing at a good level. He is going to come in and he's going to be a culture setter for better or worse in your locker room. So I think you've got to take all that into consideration. But yeah, some interesting names.
Makes a move yesterday. And again, we stay away from grading players because who the hell knows? But when you grade the move, I think there's no other way to put it but an A move. You take you assume that the Spurs are going to be in the playoff hunt in 2 years. That 2027 Spurs pick conveys to 2 second rounders it is top 16 protected. So it looks like, Sam Presti's got plenty. He's kicking the can down the road. I said this earlier to Jason. Somebody had said online that the Kings got the chicken and Sam Presti got the egg. I love that way of describing this move. And he gets into the late mid first round, let's call it, and picks up a guy that, Sam, we were talking about this. If you didn't know Scott Perry and the new regime had taken over, this is absolutely a Monte McNair style pick, an older guy, a senior, 5-year player, kind of a tweener, defense, mature, high basketball IQ, et cetera, et cetera. He's not Devin Carter. He's not Keegan Murray. He's not Davion Mitchell, but they all, even Halliburton, they all kind of had similar breakdowns there. But this very much seems like a similar pick to what they've done in the past philosophy-wise.
Yeah, and I mean, it also reminds you, like, they just, they're trying to figure out the roster, but they obviously are not trying to bottom out. And, that's why you go get a 23-year-old and a guy who, again, I'm the farthest thing from a draft expert at this point in terms of the prospects, but some of the early feedback was that, that this was going to age pretty well for the Kings, that it was a nice pick and a guy who could be an impact player pretty quickly here. And that's kind of what they need. It's even writing this thing, guys, like, it's nobody wants to be disrespectful to the guys on the current roster, but it's like, if we're being real, it's just, in terms of how many guys do you look at and say, this guy is going to be helping the Kings win games in 2 years. There's just not many guys on the roster. You know what I mean? So to that end, a guy like Neek is, for their purposes, potentially a good fit, and you're trying to turn this thing over as quickly as possible.
So how do they sort that out, Sam, between all the, at different levels of assets and contracts and age between Lavine, DeRozan, Monk, now Clifford, Carter, Ellis, some guys you're going to keep, obviously, some guys you probably have desires to move. If you're looking at that kind of backcourt 1, 2, 3, or maybe more 2, 3 guys, who stays, who goes? How do you see them kind of shaking that out?
So I'm going to frame it this way. Like, if you go back to the Halliburton trade with Indiana, and you guys know this, it was like, the first exploration in terms of trades at that time was DeAaron Fox. And, they worked through that, realized that the return at that time wasn't there on Fox, mainly because people were a little afraid of his new contract. And then phase 2 was they looked at a Halliburton deal and they ended up trading him to the Pacers. Right now, like, on paper, it's Zach Lavine, is the guy. If I was handicapping who would likely be the first to go, it would be Zach. But there's not much of a market for Zach. It's a big time number. He's extension eligible. It doesn't appear that the Kings or really anybody else are looking to give him an extension right now. So now you got to go phase 2. DeMar DeRozan's still a highly productive player, but only got 1 year left. You're only going to get so much in return. I think that's why you're starting to hear about Malik Monk, and you're starting to realize that, as far as a guy who still pops on the court and who has multiple years left on his deal and, could actually net you something in return, that's where it wouldn't shock me to see something, transpire with Malik. Keegan, I mean, there's nobody untouchable on this roster, including Sabonis. I think they're entertaining conversations there. But when it comes to Keegan, I think they do see him as part of the future, would like to hold on to him. But like you guys have highlighted on the show quite a bit these last couple of weeks, when Scott went to the Knicks, it was only a matter of time before that whole roster looked different. So, we'll see if that plays out here.
Sam Amick brought to you by Jiffy Lube from The Athletic joining us. Check out his piece on the Kings from last night at theathletic.com or on the app. So, Sam, it sounds like they're just simply – I like that they're not doing anything. Last thing I want them to do is do some big commitments for a few extra wins this year. This certainly was not that type of move. It sounds to me, if you're looking at it from 50,000 feet, I'm just reinforcing what you said, that Scott Perry knows what he has in front of him. Obviously Zach Lavine, I don't want to call him a negative asset, but I don't think he's a positive asset. Overloaded in the backcourt. They're sorely underrepresented in the.
If he's not positive, what is it? What is it?
Neutral.
Yeah, sure.
They are sorely undermanned at the 4, unless you're moving Keegan down and doing an undersized 4. So it would seem that one or more of DeRozan, Lavine, Ellis, Neek, or Devin Carter, at least, and Monk, at least one, if not probably 2 of those wouldn't be on the team in October.
Yeah, I agree. And, there's been rumors about Devin Carter. And I think, that's, again, this is the tough part for the players right now is that, like Scott and his group are not, personally tied to any of these guys. And so that's why I think everything is on the table. And even like I wrote about, the Sabonis stuff, if you go back to February when the Fox trade went down, there were pretty strong signs that Domas was going to hit the summer and want some real answers. And so if Kings fans are looking for less turmoil and some signs of positivity, that is one where like Domas has had pretty extensive talks with Scott and with the organization, with Vivek. And, I know this is always a hot topic. I mean, to some degree, Vlade Divac is still part of the conversation. And that has gone okay, where Domas is being patient and letting things play out. I also think that is to some degree the reflection of his own market. He's a great player, but he still has a ton of money on his deal. And so I don't think there's trades out there where if the Kings were even wanting to do it, that it would make sense for them. And I think Domas and his camp understand that. But yeah, as far as the list of guys you mentioned, those type of guys they might not even be getting, a whole lot of direct communication, from the team right now about what lies ahead, because that's just the nature of the beast. It's that time of year. Everybody's got to kind of, put your seatbelt on and wait for this thing, this ride to end and see how it looks when training camp gets here.
Sam, you said based on, kind of what they've done so far as getting into the first round yesterday, it kind of is another sign that this organization, which isn't that uncommon, doesn't really want to bottom out. And bottoming out doesn't mean you're going to be great after that, but it's a plan. So how difficult is the job for Scott Perry to, based on the West, based on the roster, try to thread that needle of, reshaping the roster and being as competitive as possible, even though that ceiling at probably this year won't be that high?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough because, like, for one, you wonder how long will he, it's challenging to remain patient. You know what I mean? Like another name that we didn't mention that was in the piece is like Trae Young. Now, I don't think Scott ever had legitimate interest in Trae Young, but it's in the way I phrased it was there were some power brokers basically trying to get him to go after Trae Young, and that type of stuff is honestly born out of this assumption that it's like, well, it should be enough for the Kings just like to go entertain a little bit, be a little bit fun, win 40 games, and the Trae Young crew that was trying to make that happen, like that's their entire premise. Well, Scott is saying, well, no, because I want a defensive identity, and that's not what he does. And I want so there's things he wants, and I respect the fact that he's sticking to his guns and trying to find guys that fit that mold. But it's just, it's obviously insanely competitive to go after that kind of talent, and it's not advantageous when, like, ideally he would at least have a core that he was working with and trying to build off the core. I mean, you're literally trying to find the core right now.
Are you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Sam. Well, I do. But are you alluding to the fact that there are some power brokers, whether it be other GMs and agents, that are are trying to test the waters to see if they can negotiate with how they think ownership feels based on the past.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and even it's not even as specific to Vivek. Some of that is just good old fashioned like small market talk.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's it's Sac. Have a little fun, entertain the fans. That should be enough, but it's like there is blood in the water, and they are perceived as kind of a distressed place because of how things have gone. And so then it's like, if I don't want to make a tasteless analogy, but it's just like if somebody's quality of life is at a certain point, you think if you raise it 10%, they're gonna get on their knees and say thank you. And that's, I think, partly what they're pushing back against right now, is that you got to maintain a vision that's a little more elevated, but realize that it might be a little painful to get there.
A saltine is a Ritz when you're starving. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. What a wordsmith you are.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Sam, we've talked a lot about how this team probably has to approach getting better via trade, but free agency's next week? Monday. They don't have a ton of cap space here, but what kind of a player do you think the Kings might be, if at all, in the free agency hunt?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree. I don't have all their books in front of me and remember exactly what they have at their disposal, but the names we talked about, free agency is not what it used to be because so many guys are signing extensions and trades have become the primary way of movement around the association. I don't, the Kaminga one is spicy. He's obviously restricted, and that's an incredibly unique situation. I have not heard any other kind of spicy names. Dennis Schroeder is a solid vet, but
right.
If we're being real, I'm not sure Kings fans. I mean, he was a backup on the Pistons. You know what I mean? He was a guy that shored up what they did. So they'll be out there trying to find guys, but it's going to have to be a right fit for both sides.
We're speculating here completely, but it does seem like the Kings. I mean, I'm looking at cap space right now, and it's ridiculous because pretty much nobody has it. But we know these moves are going. There will be moves this summer, so it seems like we're very much talking about sign-in trades or just overall trades in general, where cap space becomes part of that value. I think there's also I don't know if you've heard anything on this. We've talked a lot about Lavine's contract, but is there, you mentioned other teams don't really, it seems like there's not much of a market to extend Zach Lavine. Is there a world, do you think, where the Kings extend Zach Lavine, not to keep him, but to make that contract more palatable and tradable?
I'm not hearing that right now.
Okay.
And you still are going to have to eat what's already on there. You know what I mean? So it's a little counterintuitive to think, even if it's at a lower rate, that somebody who wasn't feeling it in its current form is going to change their stance if you add a few cheaper years onto the back end. But yeah, that's where, I mean, that's where, I don't know, this Fox trade might haunt them for a while.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just will. Like it's the fact that sometimes it's okay in the media to just, call it like it is. And they traded an all-time King for, Bulls West. And we already knew what that looked like. The idea of like DeMar on his own and Zach on his own are very, very good players. And DeMar's a legend.
And just to double up on that, Sam, sorry. And just to double up on that too, I think it's important to point this out, that it's not just the trade and the return. It's the fact that in a different world where Rich Paul and DeAaron Fox are demanding a trade and they want to go to San Antonio, how does that request look the day after the draft lottery? How does that request look the day after Stephon Castle wins Rookie of the Year, Dylan Harper is the presumptive number 2 pick, and the Spurs have all that going on, and DeAaron? I don't even know if the Spurs even want to be a part of that trade at this point.
Yeah. And that's where, I know, Page, I love him, and he came out publicly recently,
Yeah.
making Rich Paul the villain, and it's like, great, he's an agent. That's what he does. Like
Mhm.
it's up to the organization to have, the fortitude to hold out. And again, I know we are Monday morning quarterbacks in the media, but at this point, looking back on it, yeah, you can't tell me that the better move wasn't to just hold firm. I mean, the season ended with nothing of value. You know what I mean? So what was the value loss of waiting to let the Fox thing unfold until the summer, or at minimum, and this is where the ownership influence does come into play, is like the idea that when the trade went down, that a guy like Zach Lavine, who Vivek had loved for years, was made to be a priority. Like, again, in a vacuum, fine, he's not a bad player, but how does that fit into what you have on the roster and where this whole group is going? It just doesn't make sense.
Speaking of where things are going, Sam, I'm curious your thought on the league, because there's times where, hey, just keep adding stars. We're seeing, big threes. That's the way to do it. Now we've seen OKC and Indiana get to the finals kind of just littered with depth. We've seen so many trades, teams avoiding the second apron, Bane, Durant, Porzingis, Holiday, CJ McCollum. There's been some good guys playing. It feels like there's a lot of different angles right now that organizations are attacking, whether, like I said, the second apron, trying to add stars, or trying to add depth. It's a little all over the place. It's probably fascinating for you to cover at this point.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the second apron stuff, I think I'm quickly shifting to the crowd that is, I don't think I'm going to like it in a couple of years. You know what I mean? Like, if a team like Oklahoma City is the only one that might be CBA proof because of how incredibly well built they were by GM Sam Presti, but by CBA proof, we mean that you might lose a guy like Jalen Williams or Chet Holmgren, only to then be able to replace him with a lottery pick that, because you're so good at picking talent, you might be able to kind of barely hang on when it comes to title contention. That's not, I talked to my buddy Tom Tolbert about this yesterday on his show. Like, when the Warriors got Steph and Draymond and Clay, then the Warriors deserve to hold on to Steph and Claymon and Dre. Claymon, I just combined. Yeah. And the idea that OKC is the only one out there who might be able to survive in this second apron, landscape. Like, it's wild to see Boston getting broken up. Look at Memphis. Like, Jaren Jackson Jr. qualifies for the Supermax. They should be able to look him in the eye and say, "Congrats, young fella. That's great." And the reality is, it's like, "Congrats, young fella. You probably just sped up your exit from our team, because we can't pay you, what you are now able to get paid and still survive." So, to your point, Jay, it's like the movement, it's going to be jarring, I think, at times. That's why Desmond Bane gets moved to some degree. That's why, I mean, even the opposite of that is like Giannis in Milwaukee continues to not raise his hand and ask out, because, everybody else in the East around him is kind of falling off a cliff because of the second apron, that he's wondering if maybe the Bucks can survive. So it is pretty wild.
Sam Amick of The Athletic joins us each and every Thursday. Obviously, we're off next week for the holiday, my man. Keep working. I know you got a lot of other stuff coming up, and then I look forward to that vacation.
Appreciate you guys.
All right, take
Thanks,
care.
Sam.
That is Sam Amick. We'll take a break. When we come back, all right, we'll recap Kings.